Hello, my name is Eric. Thanks for coming to this. I'm going to talk about PHP. It's been around for a really long time. Um, that joke isn't funny anymore, or PHP dying since 1995. Um, so about me, I live in Vancouver, Washington with my beautiful little girl and my wife. I've been at Stanford for about 18 years, doing all sorts of things, mostly system administration and web development. I started out writing a Python interface to manage um, AD services on Mac server before they implemented their own thing on it. I started PHP, I don't remember exactly, but it was around the 4.3.5.0 branch. I started doing Drupal stuff much later in probably Drupal 5. There was a GPG project I was pulled into that didn't go anywhere. I love computers, always have. My first computer was an Apple IIe, and then I got a Packard Bell and went on from there. My development started actually on using active server pages on Fedora Core 3 uh, Linux, which was a huge pain to get to work, but that's what they were using at a startup called Searchathlon that went under. Um, and shortly after that, I started working on PHP and just got fascinated with all sorts of any programming language. I have to be, when I hear about it, I have to check it out and look at it. It's just fascinating to me. I love music. I play multiple instruments. I always have to have some music going, all kinds. I listen to literally every kind of music. I love rom-coms, and my wife is always making fun of me, especially Christmas rom-coms are my favorite. And I probably would have been a historian or an entomologist if I didn't do what I do today. Um, so this is Rasmus Lerdahl. He created PHP. Um, Around 94, he started doing this just to track visitors to his website, and people reached out to him, started wanting to put it on their own sites to manage it, and it kind of just exploded from there. Um, he went on to change it. It was called personal homepage tools, form interpreters for version 2, which had SQL support for MSQL, MiniSQL, um, and it just grew from there. Uh, Zeev and Sorosky and Andy Gutman reached out to him for version 3. They completely rewrote everything, and that's really the PHP that's familiar. Today, you can go to museum.phpnet and find all versions back to 0.9, I think, which is pretty interesting to look through the code of that and see how it worked. Um, so this is an example of the original PHP. It was basically just looked like server-side includes. It was very simple, not a lot to it. I also want to mention that I'll share these, and in the notes, there's many, many links to it. I'm very heavy on links, and I firmly believe that you should teach a person to fish. So there's lots of references here for all sorts of things. So in 2.0, we got SQL support, we got cookies, you could define your own functions, you could upload, they implemented arrays and the GD extension. In 3, they completely rewrote it. They changed, that's where we get the PHP style tags now. They added some object-oriented support, changed the way concatenation works, restructured the way the if-else blocks work. PHP 4, they rewrote it again, and that's where the Zend engine came into place. They added support for tons of web servers because around this time, everybody put out a web server trying to get out there. They implemented sessions. They added the get and post and cookie, all that. They added the stream system. You notice in the change logs at this point that they start to separate it out and are focusing on security as the web grows. More and more people are getting concerned about that. In 4.3, it was mostly, backports from 5, which was going at the same time. 5 is what everybody is probably familiar with. This is lasted from 2004 to 2018. And this is where tons of things came into place for it. We got the Zend Engine 2, completely new object model, added reflection, iterators, interfaces, traits, the SPL library, JSON, international extensions, date time zone. And then in 5.5.6, it's probably the biggest changes. They added a hash equals function, short arrays. They added windows.phpnet, started working with 64-bit support, anonymous functions, namespaces, and they added the password hashing API. All kinds of cool stuff. You can check the notes in there. PHP 6, we don't really talk about PHP 6. It was originally, to implement Unicode support, I think, and it was skipped over. But you can still buy a book if you go to Amazon on this link about it, because there were books released. So version 7, this is, I believe, when most of the biggest changes for security, for standardization of all sorts of things. We got type hints to start turning into a more strongly typed language, null coalescing operator, spaceship operator, random bytes functions. This is what most people complained about, was the countable interface. The count changes. You can no longer count false or null, which should have originally been there. And I still don't understand why people were so angry about this change. Just check that you're going to count something that's countable first. The FFI extension, which is lots of languages have this already, which is just very awesome. I think this is what really propelled PHP to where it is now. Deprecations, removed MySQL functions, which were deprecated in 5. This also made people very angry. PHP 4 type constructors, where the constructors, the class name was deprecated. Can no longer call non-static methods, makes sense. They deprecated providing a salt in the password hash, because you shouldn't really create your own salt. If you can, leave it to the experts for the implementation. PHP 8. So this introduced all sorts of named parameters. There's links to all of these in the notes, to the RFCs. We got attributes, constructor properties. They added union types, intersection types, mixed type, final class properties, a null safe operator, which is extremely useful. You can now throw in exceptions, enumerations, finally, read-only properties, sensitive parameter. This is a security thing, so you don't leak your passwords in the logs. JSON validate, we no longer have to write our own logic to throw a JSON exception. Then 8.4, property hooks, which was taken, the implementation was taken from Kotlin, which is like Java, where you don't have to actually, you can set a property and say this has a get and a set method. Asymmetric visibility, so you can make your set private and your get public. Finally, HTML5 parsing, and types for local variables, which is going to be really helpful. Again, there's a big list here in the notes. I'll share this later. All right. So that joke isn't funny anymore. Why does why is everybody down on PHP all the time? It comes from the original implementation, which wasn't. Other languages all had the same problem. I don't know why PHP got singled out, probably just because it was very, very popular, and so which made it become a big target. So people have bad or very outdated information, out-of-date tutorials. I'm looking at you, YouTube. Linux distributions, things like CentOS and Red Hat have always, they're so stable they become unstable. Until recently, like CentOS was using PHP 5.2. And although they have backported patches and stuff, it's still that it's so old. Just don't use it. PHP libraries and programs try to keep maximum compatibility, and it ends up suffering in a way where you don't get these new features in it, and so you still have to run an outdated PHP version in order to run it. Recently, there was a big thing on the Drupal SAML module and the simple SAML maintainers, where they barely supported 8, and they didn't want to keep pushing forward on this. It's just bad practices, and it just opens you up to a lot of security issues and compatibility issues. Bandwagon effect. Anybody who's been on Reddit, any new developer, PHP is bad, you get all the upvotes. And recently when I was looking at it, there's a lot of forgotten websites out there, I think. Looking at the usage of, like, there's sites out there using Drupal 5 and 4, WordPress 3, and I think people just forgot about it. They had these. So this is, right now, most people are using version 7. That's the last push for that was 2 years ago. Only 28% are using version 8, and of that 8, 36% are using 8.0, which is also end of life. But 7.4 is the most used right now. But there's still sites out there using version 4, using version 5, and it's bad. So what can developers do? Stop using unsupported versions. There's tons of things out there that can help you not use the most recent up-to-date. DevStory, this is for Debian. You can install multiple versions, use update alternatives to switch them around. The Remi repo is for Red Hat. You can use DDev, you can use Lando, just go directly to Docker to do this. So check the change logs, then you have no surprises. You can get ready before it's even released. PHP's also always been really, really good at their change logs. That's something that's been very consistent in a world of other things that haven't been consistent. Use best practices. The PHP Fig, these guys create standards, and it's a bunch of people that vote on them from PHP community, from projects like Symfony and Laravel and PHP Unit. PHP the Right Way is a great website that has all sorts of things for security, for installing, all sorts of things. So you can share your knowledge instead of, when I see something in JavaScript that doesn't make any sense, I don't yell at JavaScript developers for it. So talk to a JavaScript developer on how you can better do this. Reddit's a great community for that. Join the mailing list. There's a ton of them. Use libraries from experts. Don't roll your own stuff. If it's serious like security, don't write your own password hashing methods. Other people have done it, and it's been around, tried and tested, and this is where I think a lot of people get into trouble. Well, I can do it better. Well, if this library's been out for 20 years and its last push was 2 weeks ago, they're probably doing it better. Read the manual is a good place too. The docs. SymphonyCast is a great site. mainly focuses on Symfony, but it has best practices in there. Laracast has best practices, mostly about Laravel. The PHP internal book, I think this is a good place because you can see how PHP really works on the inside. And that I believe that makes me a better developer if I know how it's implemented on the back end of it. This has PHP, hasn't been updated in a little while. It's got PHP 7 and 8. All right, so on to some interesting things. So Box is cool. It's been around for a long time. It helps you create FARs, PHP archives that are self-contained, PHP applications. So there's zero configuration, so you can just download the FAR and run it, and it'll put everything into a single file. It checks all the different requirements, which is difficult when you're with FARs because it might be using different libraries, and then when you go to run it, it's going to say I don't have that. So this makes sure everything is there. It'll verify signatures. There's Docker support. There's Symfony support, which I'll talk about again in a second. It's very cool. I've been using this for years. So this is something I wrote a long time ago. I wanted a function on Linux like getch and ungetch, and people everywhere asked. I said that can't be done. You can't do that. So I said I don't like being told things aren't possible in the computer world. So I went out to try and do this. You can use term.ios for it, is what like Symfony command line libraries use. But that doesn't have the same functionality. The Windows implementation of this, it's outdated and old, and they just keep including it for some reason. Like when you press a function key, it sends a 0 and then a number for that function key. The up and down arrows do the same thing, but if you use like the number keys for up and down arrows, it's going to send you a 224 key code, and then the thing for the up arrow or down arrow to let you know it was done through the keypad. So I wanted all of that functionality to exist in here. So I did that and made it work, and then I created a package to use it in PHP in command line applications. So yes or no, I hit Y and it automatically returns for me. You can also do things if you have like a buffer class, for you can store the characters in there and then you have a buffer full of them where you don't have to like read line and edit line. They don't really work like that. You can't pop the stuff out and in character by character really. So I wrote this mainly because I'm anybody who remembers the BBS world, I'm actually writing a BBS in pure PHP on the back end. I wanted this kind of functionality for Telnet and such anyway. And then Swole, this is one of my favorite projects. It's an event-driven, asynchronous, coroutine-based concurrency library with high performance. It has built-in support for TCP, HTTP servers. There's coroutines. So asynchronous, well, almost asynchronous MySQL, but asynchronous Reddit, file routines, curl, sockets. So this is something that I use in different things I'm writing. There is also an open Swole, and the rumor is that they disagreed on security practices, so open Swole was born, and it's mostly the same. The cool thing about this, you could go back to Box. There's a Symfony plugin for Box, so you could write your Symfony application, then create a FAR out of that Symfony, and then use Swole as a PHP runtime for Symfony, and you'd have a fully self-contained application running a web server through Swole, and deploy it fairly easily and just proxy to the port it happens to be listening on. There's a lot of links here that very interesting. PHP Brew. This is very cool. This is you're able to manage multiple versions of PHP, and it's written in pure PHP on the back end. I'm going to go into this real fast. So it has support here for, you can fully customize whatever you want to do with it. Say 8.3 as 8.3 NTS defaults. Oops. Oh. Okay, so this is one of the downsides of it. If you're using more, I might be using All right, so we're going to skip that demo. Nothing ever goes right when you're live. What you can install from GitHub, different tags. On the newer systems, you can only compile 8.0 because of OpenSSL on it, but you can install older versions of SSL if you OpenSSL if you want to test out older versions, or if you're working on a migration, you can easily switch between the two of them. You can install, I have a master PHP 4 or 8.4 dev on here right now. So it's really nice, and it's all in completely in PHP. This is kind of takes on the Gentoo has an eSelect system. That's what I've been using for years to quickly switch between them, but this kind of turns any Linux system or Mac into the same thing. So you can jump around. You say you just want a debug version of it. You want to just Postgres. You can do all sorts of things with the variants. This is my new favorite thing right here. Peach Pie. This is one of the interesting projects out there that actually can compile a binary into an executable. What it does is it compiles it into like net bytecode. There's also one out there that compiles Java bytecode, and it's pretty well supported. They've been working on it for a long time. They changed the name of it. I think they forked it and changed the name of it several years ago. And the links to all that are here, and it's fairly easy to set up even on Linux. If you add the Microsoft Net repositories to your Linux box, you can do it. On Windows, of course, you've already got all those things. But this in combination with some UI libraries is something you could easily write GUI applications or whatever you want to do. Here's some other projects which are PHP TUI is a nice library for creating terminal user interfaces. Termwind, anybody that's familiar with Tailwind CSS, basically the same thing, but for PHP command line applications, and it's got the same syntax in it and everything. Zephyr is kind of like a pseudo language that makes it easier to write PHP extensions, so you don't have to know C or all the different things you write your code in PHP more or less, and then this compiles it out to something that can be an extension, and you compile it in C or whatnot. PHP TQUI. This takes the TK library and plugs it into PHP. This is all implemented in FFI, foreign function interface. So you don't need to install any special extension. All you need is the TK libraries on your computer. I know AI is the big thing. So here's a library for machine learning training with PHP. Awesome PHP. Here is GitHub. I think most people are probably familiar with the awesome, awesome HTML, awesome CSS, these curated lists. Externals, where all the PHP external mailing lists get posted to, so you can kind of follow those and see what's coming up, what's new, what people are arguing about. The PHP RFC watch. So this kind of collects all the new different RFCs accepted for PHP 8.3, typed class constants, it's nice, but accepted for 8.4. You can see what the changes are before, and how the votes are going before they actually implement it into the language. This is Zephyr. This is so that you write this and you get this. You don't have to worry about all the code, which can be kind of confusing the way it's written some of the times. This is also, if you're interested, JetBrains put this together, which is cool. It's a very basic kind of history. Here's the initial release of Drupal. Around this time, all kinds of things were Smarty template engine, PHP unit, Xdebug, first release of WordPress. See. Yeah, and this is full of I'll share this is full of links. Let's see, 230.